Hi everybody, I'm Hannah. Welcome to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about my top 10 reads of 2025. Okay, I think a lot of the time I struggle to put these lists together just because I normally have a good idea of what my top 2 to 3 books are going to be, but everything after that is kind of a toss-up because there's a lot of really good books and that's kind of it. I had a really interesting year this year because I didn't feel like I had super great reading. I really had only 2 books that I felt really strongly were going to be in my top 10 until November. And in November, I had some of the best reading of my entire life and that continued into December. So a lot of these books, a disproportionate amount, are from those 2 months of the year, which is just crazy to me. So we're gonna jump into this. I don't expect that this will be a super long video because I'm not gonna talk a ton about these books since a lot of them have a lot more detail in my November and December wrap-ups that have been very recently posted. I do want to tell you about a little bit about all of these because these books have been some of the best reading of my entire life in some cases. So we're gonna go from bottom up. These are in a particular order and I'm gonna start with my number 10, then 9, then 8, etc. First up, we've got in 10th place, Homefront by Kristin Hannah. I loved this book so much. I have read quite a few Kristin Hannahs before, and this was one of 2 that I read this year. This is not so much a historical fiction book, it's sort of historical fiction, but I would say it more leans to contemporary. Don't totally know what part of history this takes place. Early 2000s. And basically this is a look at a marriage between Jolene and Michael. Jolene is a Black Hawk helicopter pilot who gets deployed, and Michael is a criminal defense attorney who is navigating dealing with life basically as a single dad after Jolene gets deployed because they have 2 young kids. It was a marriage and trouble book, but it's a lot more than that. I think ever since getting married, marriage and trouble books have just hit a lot harder for me, and sometimes that's not always a good thing because I can get really emotionally invested and sad when I read about them. My lovely husband is also named Michael and is also a defense attorney. Used to be a criminal defense attorney, so you can see how I drew a lot of parallels. Not between Jolene and I, because I am the furthest thing from a Black Hawk helicopter pilot. I would say this is not really a cozy story. It really guts you emotionally, not even because of Michael and Jolene's marriage necessarily, but just the other things that happen throughout the course of the book. So I would say if you're normally a Kristin Hannah fan, this would be a great one to read. If you're interested in kind of a quasi-military romance almost, you would probably like this one. Really, if you're just interested in marriage and trouble books, I would say I would recommend this one. Next up, number 9 is The Scorpio Races by Maggie Stiefvater. This is an oldie but a goodie. This came out in 2011, I believe. I've had it on my shelf for forever and just got around to reading it in November. This is basically about a bunch of water horses, or Kapelushka, off the coast of an Irish island. Basically once a year they'll come out of the surf and can be caught and raced in the Scorpio races, which take place on November 1st every year. And it's really atmospheric. I would say it's almost YA, and so we've got a little bit of romance, but it's mostly really about the horses and the relationship I think that the 2 main characters have with freedom in multiple forms. So I would recommend this one if you like YA. It's not quite fantasy. I would say more like magical realism, and I'm not normally a magical realism person at all. It really bothers me sometimes, but this one had some Irish mythology in there, and it was just a really good read. And I honestly did think it was going to be a 4-star until the very end when I got just an emotional gut punch for the last 20% or so. And you just really care for these characters, and I would say that I'm normally a big plot heavy girl, and this is definitely character driven, so it's always a pleasant surprise for me when I feel so invested in the characters such that it becomes a top 10 book for me. That is The Scorpio Races by Maggie Stiefvater. In number 8, we have Ready or Not by Cara Bastone. This is a contemporary romance. It really centers around an accidental pregnancy trope, but not in the way that I feel like a lot of people get annoyed with accidental pregnancy tropes. This one is much more, the accidental pregnancy happens at the very beginning of the book. So the rest of the book is kind of her name is Eve, navigating what it is to potentially be a single mother, be pregnant without as much support from the dad as she would like. She's not in a relationship relationship with him. It's from a one-night stand. So there's just a lot of complexities to navigate. Her best friend is also struggling with infertility at the same time. And so there's a lot of complex kind of dynamics at play in this book. And the MMC is her best friend's brother, who is just the most golden retriever energy MMC that I think you could think of. I would recommend this one. It's very much kind of in the vein of Abby Jimenez in the sense that, sorry for trailing off, my friend just Venmoed me $15 to go get coffee. Yeah, I would recommend this to someone. It's very much in the same vein as like an Abby Jimenez or an Emily Henry, where even though it is just contemporary romance, it does contain a lot deeper themes. I think that would appeal to you if that's a type of book that you like to read. That's number 8, Ready or Not by Cara Bastone. In number 7, we've got my only other contemporary romance, which is P.S. I Hate You by Lauren Connolly. This is kind of in the same vein in the sense that it is a contemporary romance, but there's much deeper themes. In this book's case, that theme is grief. Main character Maddie loses her brother pretty young, and this whole book is a kind of quest between her and her brother's best friend Dominic to go basically live out his last wishes, which are to visit the rest of the states that he never visited. And so they go to the states one at a time together to perform some task that her brother left in his will. It was just a really sweet story about grief, about healing, and about the impact and legacy that people leave on you even after they're gone. I just loved it so much. A lot of people say that Maddie as a main character is annoying, which I can see the merit to. I do think she was dealing with grief in a way that basically just made it difficult, I think, for her to feel secure in herself and her own kind of life, because she's felt like she's lived in her brother's shadow for so long and she doesn't know who she is without that. I highly recommend this one. Again, obviously lots of trigger warnings around death. I think if you're looking for something that is romance with stuff, this is a good one to pick up. Next up, we've got, I think, the only nonfiction on here in the form of poetry. This is Unlock Your Storybook Heart by Amanda Lovelace. This is my favorite poetry collection of Amanda Lovelace. If you haven't read her before, she's very similar to, I would say, like a Courtney Peppernell or a Ruby Kaur. Very accessible poetry. Great place to start if you want to get into poetry but you're not sure where or how. She usually has kind of one overarching theme throughout the book, and she's really telling a story in the form of poetry. And so this one's kind of a girl who is disenchanted by the idea of living her life the way she thought it had to be and kind of coming into her own story, which I really loved. I feel like, I don't know if it was just the time that I was reading this, but it really got me in my feels, and I was like sobbing in bed reading it, and my husband was genuinely concerned, like, are you okay? Maybe you shouldn't be reading that. It was so good. So highly recommend. This is Unlock Your Storybook Heart by Amanda Lovelace in number 6. Number 5, this is Conform by Ariel Sullivan. If you were a girl who liked Divergent or Delirium or The Hunger Games, all for the dystopian aspects, you will eat this up. This is a dystopian romance. I would say it's, some people have been calling it fantasy or sci-fi. It leans more sci-fi in my opinion, but I do think dystopian is distinct from sci-fi or fantasy. However, this is a great story. It basically is discussing the class differences between the elites, and they call them defects. There's 2 classes of defects, minors and majors. You're a minor defect and you're a woman. You have the ability to get a like mating contract with someone from the elite, basically to prevent them from inbreeding. These girls are basically brainwashed to think that that's like the only thing that they can do that's worthwhile with their life, because if they get a mating contract and they're successful in becoming pregnant, they're basically taken care of. So our main character gets a mating contract with a really important elite, and she also at the same time is kind of getting to know this major defect who occasionally pops up at her office where she works. There's a whole lot that ensues from there. Love triangle trappings. It's the first in a series, so I would say if you go into this one, know that it's the first in the series. You end this book with so many more questions than answers. The next installment will be out in March, but it is a prequel. So I think it's in the same, obviously it's in the same world, but I don't know that it has the same characters. But I have an arc of that one, so I'm planning on picking it up hopefully this month sometime. But I had such a great time with this one. It just swept me up and made me feel like I was a kid again, reading something that I was gonna stay up till 2 a.m. for on a school night. It was fantastic. Next up, we've got the first book in, I think, my favorite series that I read this year. This is Red Rising by Pierce Brown. I have not historically thought that I'm a sci-fi girl, but I would like to get into more if this is what it's like. I don't know that there's a lot of people around that don't know what Red Rising is. So So you've probably heard of this book, but if you're like me, you'd seen this book everywhere and still managed to like not really know what it is. Basically, it is a caste system, again, where everybody is divided up into colors. Each color is supposed to be predisposed towards a specific type of labor, and that kind of informs their ranking in the societal hierarchy. And so our main character, Darrow, is a red, which means he's basically the lowest of the low. His entire existence is geared towards being a miner of subterranean fossil fuels called helium-3 that essentially power all of the other colors' lives. And it's just his story and how he comes to be sort of the accidental head of a rebellion. And I've read the first, so it's kind of broken up. There's going to be 7 books, currently 6 out, but it's divided into kind of this original trilogy and then the second era. So I'm done with the first trilogy. Please do not put spoilers. I have not read Beyond Morningstar. And this one I put on my top 10, mostly because I think for me, I love starting a new series and sinking into the world. There was just something so nostalgic about this, and just growing with Darrow and seeing how he really comes into his own as a human being and as a leader is so, I feel like heartwarming sounds really diminutive, and that's not how I mean it, but this is where I really came to love Darrow and get to know him. As you grow with him in the later books, obviously he sticks with you, and I do have another book on my top 10 from this series, but there's just nothing that could beat this first one for me, so I loved it for that reason. Highly recommend this series. I do think there's something for everybody here. A lot of people will say, don't read it if you don't like romance, but there is romance in here. Not this book as much, but the series does include romance. It does include love. It does include found family, friendships, betrayals, everything. So if you're a character forward reader, if you're a plot forward reader, there is something in here that you will love, and that is Red Rising by Pierce Brown. Next up in our number 3 spot, we've got A Forbidden Alchemy by Stacey McEwen. This is the Fairy Loot version, and I am obsessed with it. Excuse me, this is the Owl Crate version, and I am obsessed with it. I've heard it compared to Peaky Blinders in vibe, and I've never seen Peaky Blinders, so I can't sign on to whether I think that's correct, but I think you should read this book. It's sort of got a Mockingjay feel to it in the sense that we're on the crux of this rebellion from kind of the main society, and our main girl basically gets kind of caught in the middle and is running from the capital when she finally decides that she's had enough of living in kind of their mold that she's supposed to be part of. So basically everybody in society in here is either a craftsman or an artisan, and the artisans are kind of the magical special elite group, while the craftsmen are more or less just the miners. And we first meet Nina and Patrick, our main characters, when they're 12 years old, and they're basically getting not sorted, but basically sorted into artisans or craftsmen. Patrick only wants to be a craftsman so he can be with his family. Nina dreams of being an artisan. They both find out through kind of a weird smattering of events that artisans don't have any kind of innate ability. They're just chosen. With that knowledge, Nina becomes an artisan, Patrick becomes a craftsman, and they don't meet again until our story starts. Patrick hasn't forgotten about her. He wants to use her in this rebellion, this craftsman rebellion that he's leading in place of his father, who has been killed by the society. And you also get kind of a love triangle element a little bit, and it's just so good. I think if you're typically a romantasy lover, you will find this one fresh, new, fun, interesting, and I can't wait for the next installment. That is A Forbidden Alchemy by Stacey McEwen. Next up in our number 2 spot is The Dagger and the Flame by Catherine Doyle. I loved this book so much. It really did sweep me away. I think this is the only book, this is one of 2 books that I read in the front half of the year, and it stuck with me this whole time. So basically we've got Sarah and Ransom, who are members of these rival guilds, essentially. There's a thief guild and an assassins guild called the Cloaks and the Daggers. The magic system in this is really interesting because it's all based on this substance called shade, and no one has any inherent magic abilities. They all need shade in order to effectuate magical ability, essentially. And Ransom gets an assignment to kill Sarah, and as you might guess, when they meet, that ends up not happening, and our story unfolds. This is such a fun romance with so much witty banter. It reminds me of Throne of Glass when we're first meeting Celaena and her and Dorian and Kale's relationship, if that means anything to you. But we're also set in this city of Fantôme, which kind of feels like a gritty London, sort of like a Ninth House vibe, honestly. I know that's not set in London, but it's just, again, kind of like a Forbidden Alchemy. So fresh and different that I think if you like romantasy, you'll really like this one and find that it's doing something that feels different and new and exciting. So highly recommend this one. I absolutely loved it. The sequel is The Rebel and the Rose, and I believe it came out in December. So I have it from Book of the Month and I can't wait to read it this year. That is The Dagger and the Flame by Catherine Doyle. All right, our number one book, long awaited. Okay, this book I read in December. So that is a lesson to all of you to not put together your best of lists until you actually know whether they're your best of lists. This is Morningstar by Pierce Brown. This is the third book in the Red Rising series. I loved it so much. I am big into plot and payoff, really the emotional resonance that a final book comes with. Now we know this isn't the final book, but at the time we didn't know it was the final book. So we get like an epilogue in here and things. Oh my goodness. This book, just thinking about it, makes me want to cry. The epilogue specifically makes me want to cry. I'm not going to give you a lot by way of synopsis just because this is, again, the third book in a series, but if you have any inkling to start the Red Rising series, you should, because you'll get to this book. Well, thank you for joining me for that journey. That is all of my top 10 books of 2025. What I thought was kind of a mediocre reading year turned into being one of the best. And I am so thankful for all of the books I read and all of the books in this stack particularly, because they will be with me for a very, very long time. That's it. Thanks so much for coming to this video. And if you're still here watching, I would love it if you told me your top book of the year or a couple of your top favorites if you can't pick. I will see you in the next video. Happy reading.